guys. Welcome back to another episode of Money in the Bank. This is Angie, your host. With me, I have Brett.
Hey guys.
How's it going, Brett?
Good. Glad to be back again.
Yeah, so I'm really actually very excited for today's episode because it's one of my nerdy topics of enjoyment, and that's mortgages. I think you know, probably more than anybody else, how much I love this stuff.
Yeah, second only to hunting down real estate. I think you like understanding, evaluating, cheating mortgages, basically.
Well, and I think our mortgage broker, because I've worked with him so many times, he loves me. He jokes and he's like, "Oh yeah, you're our favorite client because you know what we need from you before we even tell you." Because I even love the underwriting process of a mortgage.
Yeah, they were a little crazy in that regard, I think. But who loves submitting 400 documents to a big server somewhere?
It's like a game. But anyways, we'll dive right in after that little tangent about how nerdy I am. So I think we should talk about the first house that we bought, because I think we learned a lot, and I think while we thought we were making some good decisions, hindsight is always 20/20, and I think we kind of made a lot of mistakes and overpaid in some areas. So I think sharing that could help other people.
Sure. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit here about what we did, right? Not what should be done necessarily, but we do want you guys to learn from some of the mistakes that we made early on in the process. Because that was the first time we had ever used a mortgage. Personally, first time we had bought a house, and it's very exciting, very enticing, and it's very easy to get into trouble when you are in the house buying process because it's very exciting. It's very emotional for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
I had to rein you back, I think, a couple times in buying the right houses.
Excuse me. If I remember correctly, my budget when we were looking for our first house was $150,000. What was your budget?
I think, what did I say? $225?
$225, yeah. Which oddly enough was the price of our second house.
So I was right on the money, right?
But we, Brett was ready to go to $200,000. And I was no, $150,000, which was really funny because, we weren't married yet, actually. We weren't even engaged. So there's one, don't make the same mistake we did. We were two separate people, but I bought it in my name, and I bought a house that I could afford in the event that we did not stay together. We didn't want to tie it to both of our incomes. So I remember my budget was $150. You were oh, we can go a little higher, but I was no, I want to be able to afford it on my money. But I remember I got approved for almost $300,000, and I was that's double what I want to spend. That's crazy, right?
And for we live in Michigan, so in our market that is pretty normal. That $300,000 is going to get you a really nice house anywhere you go.
Yeah, so if you live in a high cost of living area, haha, suckers, be jealous. No, I kid. We will come back to you later and talk about higher housing prices, but for us,
the right numbers, our percentages will still make sense. But.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyways, we were looking, and we ended up finding a house, and our first house was $160,000, so closer to my budget than yours. I still felt like I could afford the monthly payments on my income, which was important to us at the time. But I think one downfall was so just to give a little bit more perspective, I paid off my student loans a year after graduating, and then I worked on my car, and I paid my car off the same month that we closed on the house. So really, we were only able to put 5% down because I had been paying all my other debt off.
Right. So a good portion of that down payment ended up eventually coming from me, right?
Yes.
For the first house.
And so how we did that, because we weren't married, is you can give people a gift up to $14,000 that is non-taxable. So in that way, he was able to for the house that we were going to live in together, he was able to give me the down payment so I could put everything in my name. So that is, one thing that I do want to mention, because I think a lot of times for people, they might have parents who want to help them with their down payment, or, a significant other, or, whatever the case is. Just know that there is that gift law where you can transfer some money over without it being taxed as income.
Yep. And keeping it on the up and up.
Yeah. So yeah, we only put 5% down, which meant we had a PMI on that, which is private mortgage insurance, and it was about $100 a month on top of our mortgage. And the only reason we purchased that house with a PMI is because I was at that time in my life, I was in money saving mode. I mean, I was used to saving like 15 grand a year to pay off debt. That's what I had done since I graduated college. So I was like, I can get to that 20% in like a year.
Right, and we were in a situation where at that time we had a dog already, so living in an apartment was a little bit more expensive for us because we have a large, golden retriever, golden lab, so a bigger dog, so it's harder to find an apartment, and it's going to come with a pet fee. So we were looking at, pretty expensive cost of living for where we were in apartment fees. It was actually cheaper for us to get a mortgage. So it was very appetizing for us to look at buying a house, right? It was kind of the right decision, even though we didn't have the full down payment for it.
Well, and not only was it cheaper, I think, so we were paying $1,200 for our apartment, and buying the mortgage, I think our mortgage on that originally was like $1,040. So we were saving a couple $100 a month, and we had twice the space. I mean, instead of a 2-bedroom, we had a 4-bedroom. Instead of a 1-car garage, we had a 2-car garage.
And a yard.
And a yard, and a fenced-in yard. That was like the best thing ever with a puppy. So, we were just ready. We were ready to go. But not to say we didn't make some mistakes. So come to find out, when I originally talked to the mortgage broker, and I use a different guy now, but at that time, the one that I had used, he told me, once you hit 20%, your PMI will just drop off. And that was bad information. That was wrong. We had to refinance to get the PMI to drop off. And refinancing costs money.
Yep. So be careful there. That's what we were mentioning at the beginning of the podcast here. Something that we, wish we could do differently. That's definitely of the regard. So first step, not paying 20% down is risky. You have the PMI, it's just extra money, not recommended to not invest with or invest with less than 20% down. And then, the PMI, when you go to actually get rid of it, if you're in a situation where you can get rid of it, if that was part of the terms you negotiated, it comes with extra fees associated with it as well. It's not just a magic bullet that falls off. So, and for most people, you probably shouldn't do it anyway. I mean, we were in a specific situation where we knew we had the income and the finances, and we're super savers, and we were definitely going to be paying that off within a year, right? We were getting rid of that. Number one priority, first thing, all our money was going toward that, right? And so, most people probably are not in that situation.
And, something to mention, so let's say we did the 5% down and we stuck with the normal payments, we wouldn't have gotten to 20% equity in the house until 7 years in. So, but we bought that 3 years ago, somewhere around there. We would have only been at like 15%, not even 15% right now, 10% right now.
Yeah, we still would have the PMI. Right?
We would still have the PMI. We wouldn't even have, so when we sold the house, we wouldn't have enough equity out of it to probably even cover closing costs, let alone a down payment for a new house. Right. So I think that's a danger of if you're buying a house and you're not going to stay there for more than 3 to 5 years, if you don't have 20% down, or you're not planning on building that equity up very quickly, you will likely lose money at the end of the day when you go to sell it.
For sure. Yep. And right, and that's in our area, which is low cost of living area. If you're in a higher cost of living area, it just compounds those problems.
Right. So let's just move on. So when we were we're buying a house, we need to get a mortgage. And there's all these different options they present you, right? There's a 10-year fixed, a 15-year fixed, a 30-year fixed, and then there's things called ARMs. So there's, 2-year ARM, a 5-year ARM. How familiar were you with any of those terms?
You hear it thrown around. I didn't know what it stood for. I knew what a variable interest rate was, right? Because I was, cognizant of the environment when the mortgage crisis happened in 2008. So, just from hearing about all that stuff, I was, and my mom was always very anti-variable interest rate mortgages and things like that, because that's where people were getting hosed over time, right? Because you get a good interest rate for 5 years or something, and then it just spikes up huge, and then people were just losing their shirt because they couldn't handle the interest rate anymore. Yeah,
so I do want to clarify what you're talking about. I think is more like a balloon payment. So basically what happened was in the subprime mortgage crisis specifically that you're talking about in 2008, people were getting mortgages where they were only paying interest for the first 5 years. And then all of a sudden the principal got added to their payment. So that's even a little different than like the way they're structured now. So basically, like, you know, they were paying a small portion of their payment and all of a sudden it blew up and the balance was still the same, right? They hadn't made a dent in it.
Right.
So now the way 5-year ARMs work is you do pay a portion of the principal, but ARM stands for adjustable rate mortgage, which is like a variable rate. And so you get it, but they typically have the lowest interest rate. So it kind of goes in order from high term to low term. So 30-year will have the highest interest rate, 15 will be lower, 10 even lower, and then 5-year ARM will be even lower. So sometimes if you go in and you're like, oh, well, I'm like $20 off to where I feel comfortable. They might be like, oh, well, look at this one and it gets you there because it has the lower interest. Well, if it's a 5-year ARM, your payment is only locked in for the first 5 years. And then after that, they can adjust your interest rate. So your payments might go up.
Right. So that's equally or more dangerous. Yeah.
But, you know, again, going back to talking about tools, you know, I don't want to say it's always bad because there are situations where it could make sense. Sure. So if you're a super saver or if you're, you know, buying like a very cheap property, you know, especially around us and where we live in the Midwest, there's some houses that you can scoop up for 50 grand, right? So if you're buying a house for 50 grand and you're like, I can pay this off in 5 years, get that, but then don't make minimum payments, you know, pay it down aggressively.
Yeah, and I think that's where people get caught up in the normalcy of the world is, you know, you get a house, you have the mortgage, you just pay on the mortgage because those were the numbers that the bank gave you or the mortgage company gave you, and you just pay on it until it's over, right? And that's 30 years later, 15 years later, whatever you end up getting. And people maybe don't think about paying extra on that over time, right? Where kind of we took the opposite approach and we were just like, how fast can we get rid of this thing, right? How much can we pay on these mortgage payments to like see that principal just fall off every month? And every month we would put more money on it and look at it, and the principal would just be knocked off tremendously for all that extra money we were putting on it up front, right? So it's a huge difference. People don't think about it. They just, you know, get it comfortable with paying the mortgage payment, and then it's over 30 years later.
Well, and so in the 6 months that we've lived in our new house, or 7 months now, we've already chopped off 6 years of our mortgage.
Right, from what, double payments basically?
Yeah,
almost?
Well, a little more than that. We're pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
So, you know, kind of just to backtrack to recap, and then I'll move forward on this topic. But if you're debating between a 15 and 30-year mortgage, I would recommend for the average person, go with the 15-year. That way, if you're making minimum payments, it's over in 15 years. You're not paying as much interest by a long shot. But if you're worried about being able to make the payments, go with a 30-year, but then pay on it like it's a 15-year. And if you need to dial those payments back someday, then you have the flexibility to, but otherwise you're still getting it paid off in 15 years.
Right. And there's a big caveat there, though, too, and this kind of moves into the next topic area of, should you be paying, you know, is there a good reason that you should be paying the minimum payments on your mortgage?
So, unless you are very intentionally designing an investment strategy that involves paying minimums on your mortgage, my answer for the average Joe is no. Now, there are subsets of people out in the world that are a little nerdier and more like me and are going to analyze all these different cash flows and scenarios and love being in Excel and modeling projections.
Shout out to the mustachians if you're listening.
For you, the answer is probably yes, pay the minimum, invest the difference. You're not controlled by emotions. You're stronger than that. You know, there's a whole subset of people that's fine. But for most people, if you're paying the minimum, you're paying so much more interest than you realize. And unless it's part of your long-term financial strategy, kill your interest. Even if you pay $100 more on your mortgage, you're going to pay it off so much faster.
Right. Yeah. So again, if you are intentionally and strategically using the money that you would paying extra on the mortgage payments in another area that is making you more money, right? So your mutual fund is killing it, right? Or you have, property and investment properties that are, making money hand over fist with a rental income, and that's making more than you'd be, making more over the 30 years or the 15 years than you would overall from not having to pay mortgage for 15 years, right? Then go with that strategy. But few and far between, right?
A very quick test. If the words leverage or inflation protection make sense to you, then the Zeigerbachers say that you are qualified to make minimum payments on your mortgage. If those terms do not make sense to you, I encourage you to try to pay extra on your mortgage, even if that's just rounding up to the nearest, like, $50, right? So even if your payment's like $11.08 and you start paying $11.50, I'm happy.
Right, because that's paying extra on the mortgage is where you can get more gains likely than you'll see in any other investment opportunity areas for the normal person.
Well, and I think for the normal person, you're more motivated by paying stuff off sometimes. So do what motivates you. If you're motivated by like putting more in a mutual fund, that's great. Like if you are contributing to a mutual fund, don't stop. That's fine. I'm happy. But if you're not contributing to a mutual fund and you're paying the minimum on your mortgage, I need you to either contribute to a mutual fund or pay more on your mortgage, right? Like that's your next step. That's your task to do. And so, maybe we should talk a little bit about what our strategy was and how in the last month our strategy has changed in regards to our mortgage.
Right. So we have always been, since we got our first house, of the mindset of paying off that mortgage as quickly as possible is the right thing for us to do. We're highly motivated to pay the house off as fast as possible, retire as early as we possibly can, right? Not have that debt hanging over us because we're both very debt averse to having any kind of debt. But since we've been involved in the investment property area more, we're learning the right way to leverage those assets, right? And take advantage of leveraging those properties and our investment strategies, right? So it is more opportunistic for us in our personal situation to take advantage and use the money that we would have been paying on the mortgage to invest in other investment properties, because over the long term we looked at the numbers and we looked at where we would be 30 years from now if we pay off the mortgage as fast as we possibly can, and where we would be if we took that same money now and invested it in real estate and rental properties. And it's in the math worked out for us in our area, in our markets, that it would make sense for us to have rental properties and over that same time period,
especially because the interest rate on our mortgage is so low.
Sure.
And that's
absolutely.
what's driving this whole thing right now. That's what's allowing us to do it, is we got locked in at such a low interest rate. But when we bought our first house, it was the right strategy for us to put more into that house because we only had 5% equity and we were using that as a tool to save for our next house. So we knew that like by the time we sold that house, we needed to have the 20% down payment for our next house. Yep. Right. And so that's what we had out of it. We were able to do 20% down on this house that we live in now. So, it was still strategy. It was still strategic where, once for us, it seems like once we put money in a mutual fund, we're like, we will never take it out ever. So, for us, it's just, we put it in there and then we knew in 3 to 5 years, we would be selling that house and buying a new house. And so, a lot of times they say if it's going to be a shorter term investment like that, you don't know what the stock market's going to do, so that might not be the right place for it. So we chose to save, in a different way. And then when we bought this house, originally we were like, let's just pay it off. Our goal was to pay it off before I turned 30. And up until a month ago, that was still the goal. And then, like you said, as we went down the road with investment properties, we were like, actually, it makes more mathematical sense since we're staying in this house much longer term to let the mortgage ride and start investing. I will caveat that with, by the time we pull the plug and retire, whether it's, early retirement or we push it back and retire at a more normal age, our house will be paid off. Right.
I mean, that's still a priority for us. We're still debt averse. It's still difficult for us to make the conscious decision, right, to use that money in other areas. But you can't argue with the math, right?
Well, I mean, we ran the numbers 50 times. So we know that the numbers are sound and they check out. And so, yeah, you know, like for us, it works, but we're still not paying the minimum on our mortgage.
Right.
I mean, that's the funniest thing. Like, we still round up to the nearest 100. So we're still actually, you know, shaving some time off our mortgage in the process.
Right. Because it's in all scenarios, the right strategy to do is to, you know, see those gains from that principal come back, because the extra $50 here and there isn't going to hurt our chances at buying an investment property, but it's going to help us gain quite a bit on you know, the mortgage. So
yeah,
every little bit helps there. And, you know, we're just biding our time. We're looking at the real estate market. We're finding things as they pop up. So, you know, we're not in any particularly large hurry to like get, you know, 25 different real estate investments under our belt in the first year, right? We're getting the right investments, the right things. So while we have extra money to not invest in that right this minute, you know, we have opportunities to continue paying off the mortgage where it makes sense.
Yeah, and so, you know, that's something else I kind of want to mention while we're on the topics of mortgages. So, you know, the house that we live in now is actually all in my name, and we did that strategically so that as we buy real estate investments, Brett's credit is completely open. So he doesn't have those debts on his credit history and his credit score. So we can kind of bounce back and forth to get these additional mortgages as we go.
Right, because the way that we're buying our investment properties, and we'll caveat that, the first one that we got, we paid in cash. The next one we got was a duplex that was a little more expensive. So that one we ended up getting a mortgage for, but we're going to pay off that mortgage like ASAP, right? As part of our strategy there.
No, we're going to leverage that mortgage.
We're paying it off as fast as we possibly can, and then we're going into the next one and following through.
Well, no, so we've talked about that a little bit actually, and you know, for us, we are debt averse. We don't like too much debt hanging over our head. So even though it's like, you can tell me all day it's the right financial decision, but at some point, like, decisions do become emotional. And so, you know, for us, we're like, okay, we'll have the most we'll have is like 2 rental properties with a mortgage.
Right. And
then they're going to start getting paid off. And, you know, because then it gives you a lot of freedom. Like the unit that we bought with cash, it's like we have so much flexibility with the income that we're getting from that. We don't have all these obligations hanging over our head. And so it allows us to reinvest. And, you know, for us, in terms of replacing income and having residual income, we're looking to get to the point where we can kind of live off of this income someday. So having these units paid off, even if, you know, arguably it'd be better to keep investing more and more and getting more units, there's a point in which we can be like, we have enough units, and if they're all paid off, we're generating enough cash that we don't need to worry about this anymore. Right.
And it's just it goes from 1 to, you know, the next couple are going to be the hardest to get. And then eventually, you know, once we have a couple under the belt there, they're going to end up paying for all the future investments themselves. So it's just getting through the initial, you know, hurdle, you know, so we'll have the mortgage on the house at the same time, the, you know, initial mortgage on the duplex that we just are getting, and then probably the next 1 to 2 at the, you know, around the same time. So that'll be the hardest window to get through.
Yeah.
Then after that, we'll have enough residual income that we'll be able to leverage our own assets rather than having to work through the lenders.
And I think something I want to caveat to this discussion is, like, we are by no means stretching ourselves thin by doing this. It's true leverage. You know, the unit that we're purchasing now is going to, or the unit that we just purchased, like, it has cash flow coming off of it. We are not paying that mortgage. It is getting covered and then some, you know, and this is going to be, I actually want to do a whole topic about real estate, but, you know, a lot of people think like, okay, I think a lot of people who bought their first house are like, okay, now I can rent out my first house and buy a second one. And as long as I get the mortgage covered, that's fine. And I'm here to tell you that that's not fine. When you are evaluating a rental income, you need to have the mortgage covered. You need to build in a vacancy rate. You need to build in a maintenance rate. You need to build in a property management fee. And we will do a whole episode about this, so don't worry too much about that. But after all of those things are taken out, you also want to walk away with some cash in your pocket. And if you can't do that, it's not a good rental.
Right. If you're not walking away with money right out the gate with all these other expenses and potential problems and potential failures and things like that, just walk away, because it's not a good investment.
So, I mean, basically, if you're like, oh, my mortgage is, you know, $900, but I could rent this place for $1,000, probably not going to make money, probably a bad decision.
Yep.
So I think we've covered this pretty well. There's probably a lot more we could talk about. So, if you're in the process of getting a mortgage, or maybe you already have a mortgage, I guess we haven't really talked about refinancing. Maybe we should touch on that before we wrap up.
Sure. We've covered first-time home buyers and things to watch out for. And even if you do have a mortgage today, things that you could look back on and still fix. But how do you fix it? Yeah. How do you do that refinance? And when does it make sense to do a refinance? Because we did go through that process once already ourselves as well. As we said, when we needed to change the PMI.
Yeah.
On our house, we had to go through that once.
Yeah. So I would say, if you had a PMI on your house originally, and then either you've paid the equity down, so you have more equity in your house, or you have, maybe your house is appreciated over time, and you're like, okay, I have more than 20% equity in the house, then I would encourage you to consider doing a refinance, because if you can get the PMI to drop off, that might go in your favor. Another thing to look at is, even if you don't have a PMI, you've lived somewhere for maybe 10 years, it might not be a bad idea to look at refinancing, solely because interest rates are so low right now. So, if you have over a 6% mortgage rate, you could probably drop, if you can drop your rate, I think they say 1% or more, it could be a good idea to refinance. So you still want to crunch numbers for your financial situation. But, if you're at over 6%, I'm pretty sure you could drop it, almost 2% right now. So it's probably
the fours for sure.
Yeah. So it's probably a good idea to look at refinancing. Now, I will say, if you are 10 years into a mortgage and you refinance, for the love of God, do not get a 30-year mortgage, because then you went from 30 years to 40. So if you're 10 years in, you're looking at 15, maybe even looking at 10. You really don't need to get a 30.
Right, and look at your roadmap, right? Look at your personal roadmap, and maybe if you were 19 when you got your first house and you had a 30, and you could still pull off another 40, right? But if you're 40 years old, 50 years old, and still looking at getting a 30-year mortgage, you're not going to be able to pay off that house if you're going to continue to pay regular payments, or don't have the ability to pay anything more than the regular payments. Or if you are going to pay the regular payments, you should go down to a 15 anyway. You're not going to be able to pay that off until you're 70, right? And if you want to retire before you're 70, where's that money coming from that you need to pay off the house? So look at your financial situation, look at the whole roadmap, and really understand, does that make sense at your current juncture?
Right. Because some people, they're comfortable carrying a mortgage into retirement, and they've planned for that, and they plan for that expense, and that's fine. But there's a lot of people who don't plan for that, and then they're forced to work longer. And we're here to help you not have to work longer and really just feel like you're in control of your finances. That's the whole point of this podcast. So, hopefully by shedding a little bit more light on mortgages, we're one step closer to fulfilling our promise. But so if you have any other questions about this, or you're interested in, maybe you have a question about your specific scenario, feel free to email me, send me some notes, and I can try to give you some good advice back on that.
Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Money in the Bank. Make sure to subscribe to us on the iTunes or Stitcher app so that you get weekly alerts every time we post a podcast. Or if you want, you can visit my website, moneyinthebankpodcast.com. And if you want to reach out with any questions or further comments, please email me at Angie@moneyinthebankpodcast.com. I look forward to hearing from you.
Money in the